morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, the news never stops, does it? Just a crazy weekend of news, and then we roll into Monday, and the whole thing with Fauci just blows off the page. It's just so interesting to watch how the news cycle is working nowadays. But I guess I'll go ahead and start the show. I saw this story the other day. I'm always looking for stories in the news that kind of fit kind of the, the zeitgeist of the show. But I saw this wild story the other day, and I wanted to kind of pass it along. And it, like I said, it fits what I talk about. And occasionally there are these stories that just jump off the page to me, and this is one of them. So I guess the background on the story. So the story is there's this guy in Los Angeles County, so LA County. This guy, like a week or two ago, gets a postcard in the mail, which in and of itself is a relatively anodyne thing, but this guy gets a postcard and it's from his parents. Again, anodyne thing, but the wrinkle here is that both of this guy's parents are actually deceased. So you're like, okay, when you're reading the story, you're like, okay, you got my attention now. The post date on this card was from July of 2000. So 26 years ago. The postcard was delivered in August of 2026. So again, post dated July 2000, delivered August 2026. Now the guy's name that's involved here is a guy named Bob Shepard. So this guy, Bob Shepard in LA County, gets a 26-year-old postcard from his mom and dad. And again, they're deceased. These people sent Bob a card when they were traveling internationally. They were over in Copenhagen. So this guy's parents were traveling in Copenhagen 26 years ago and decided to send their kid a card. And the question, I guess, that jumps off the page is, why 26 years? So this Bob Shepard guy gets this card and he goes to the post office. He's like, what is this, man? So he goes in and starts talking to the post office people. And the best guess that the post office can provide is that their suspicion is that this card had like fallen out of a bin. So the card falls out of a bin like 26 years ago, and they think that it like went under like a file cabinet or a desk or something. Like it got lost in the process. So somebody 26 years later finds this card under a file cabinet or whatever. They find this card, and then they look at the guy's address and realize that Bob Shepard still lives at the same address. So they see this guy's at the same address, and they go ahead and mail it to him. It's amazing. So it's amazing that this even happened. It's 26 years. The wrinkle to me here that jumps off the page is that the guy's parents are deceased. So he's getting a postcard from his parents after their death. This is where it starts getting interesting. So his mom died 4 years ago. So this guy's mom died in 2022, 4 years ago. She was a school teacher. This guy's dad had passed away 6 years ago. So 2020. Now, his dad, I said the mom was a school teacher. The dad was this ex-army guy. So both of these people, the mom and the dad, they love traveling and they love their kids, right? So the dad who died 6 years ago, he died alone in a hospital during COVID. This is the part that jumped to me. So this guy, the dad, died in 2020. He died alone in a hospital because of COVID. I said he was an Army veteran. So you have an Army veteran that was forced to die alone in a hospital because of COVID rules and regulations. And I talked about my personal experience like a week ago or whatever. That's very similar to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law had a stroke. She spent 7 months in the hospital alone. She couldn't even have a cell phone because cell phones weren't permitted because of COVID. So this guy that got the postcard, Bob Shepard, he was not allowed to visit his dad when he was in the hospital. Because of COVID, this guy was not allowed to visit his dad in his dying moments while he was in the hospital, all the things. So this man was never able to say goodbye to his father properly. And this guy, Bob, they interviewed him on this thing, and he said that not being able to say goodbye to his dad, quote, haunts him to this day, end quote. So this man is haunted by the situation that occurred in 2020 where he couldn't visit his dad in the hospital. He referred to this postcard as his treasure. He called it a postcard from heaven. And I bring this story up again. I'm always looking for things to kind of fit into the show. I bring this story up because, first of all, I think it's wonderful. I really think that that's an amazing thing. A simple note from 26 years ago, a note from heaven seems like an appropriate thing to describe this like. 26 years ago, this guy's parents were full of life. They were seeing the world. And they took a couple minutes when they were in Copenhagen to think about their kids and sent them a note. Thinking about your kids while you're on vacation is part of what every parent does. So I think the story overall I think is beautiful, but the dark underbelly to it is that the dad dies alone in a hospital. And my only thought about it when I was reading this, unless you experience that, unless you experience that trauma, it's very hard to appreciate how horrific that is. Saying goodbye to people, going to wakes, going to funerals, that's all part of the human process of letting go and closure. But I can tell you, for living that experience personally, it's soul crushing when you see that. And I guess when you look at it more broadly, it's just, to me, another story from the wreckage of COVID. And the thing I would say, looking at everything that's happening in the news over the last few days, the man that was the architect of the wreckage that was COVID, the man who coordinated the pandemic response, somehow walks free in our society. The man who orchestrated this, who set up the COVID rules and regulations, is walking free. He walks free with an auto pen signature back to 2014. It's the same, and we're watching all this stuff play out live. I just think it's so fascinating. The same man who claimed to represent science pled the fifth 120 odd times in front of Congress and in front of people like this Bob Shepard guy. And I guess as somebody that looks at life and looks at society and wants justice for ills that occur, there is no justice here for people like Bob Shepard and myself. And not only is there no justice, there's no remorse from the people that perpetrated these acts. And the thing that I think is so interesting, and again, I've had a couple weeks now to digest the Fauci thing, and I guess we're going to keep seeing new revelations daily, but it's just so interesting watching this because the people defending Anthony Fauci at this point somehow seem to claim the moral high ground. They're still talking about study after study. They say the vaccine saved lives. And that's just their moral cover to wag their finger and be the expert. And I think that whole position of holding this moral high ground and talking about study after study, defending Anthony Fauci, I think that's so myopic at this point. It's very obvious that the worm has turned on this. And if you look at the pandemic more broadly and you think about what happened, you can say, okay, well, the vaccine saved lives. It was a confusing time, all those other things. That's great. But the problem with it is, I think that ignores the pro-con scale that you have to look at any situation with. You can't just look at a narrow thing and say, well, that fits what I want it to be. You have to look at both sides of the ledger. Yes, the vaccine saved lives, if you want to assume that. Yes, it was a confusing time. That's on the pro side of their argument. Unfortunately, the con side is outweighing the pro side. Destroying U.S. society, harming children, letting people die alone in hospital, all these things. The cons, at a certain point, outweigh the pros. And that's, I guess, what kind of is disconcerting to somebody like myself watching this situation. Like, if the cons outweigh the pros, then isn't it a reasonable position to like think that way? And it's interesting when you look at Anthony Fauci and the fallout from what happened the other day on Capitol Hill. Fauci apparently now has summonses from 3 different states. I've seen that there's a total of 6 that are looking at active investigations into this guy. And I guess the thing you have to remember about these state investigations is that Biden pardon was only federal. So states are absolutely allowed to go after him now. And I wouldn't be surprised, based on the information that's coming out, that you're going to start seeing civil lawsuits occurring. But the 3 states that have summonses out to Fauci are West Virginia, Florida, and Louisiana. They're after him. And I guess good. Summons, depositions. If you look at how this is trending, Anthony Fauci is going to remain very, very uncomfortable in his life. And again, he's 85 years old. He's going to be very uncomfortable. And I think the more that comes out, the worse this is going to get for Anthony Fauci. Because that story's not done. Ron Johnson, the senator, the other day had released that they had Fauci's phone records from the pandemic. They have Fauci's phone records going back to 2014, apparently. So I guess the takeaway from what Ron Johnson said about the fact that they have his cell phone is that more evidence exists. So more evidence exists from the time in the pandemic where we know and we're getting a complete transcription of what Anthony Fauci was doing beyond his diary. So Ron Johnson said the other day that they have 34,000 text messages, 522 voicemails, and apparently 3 new contacts. That phone deal, again, this phone record situation came out after the whole congressional testimony thing. And to me, I think this is almost intentional at this point. This phone deal, the phone records deal, is already damning to Fauci. And I personally, at this point, don't understand how Fauci escapes this whole thing. They announced the state subpoenas and then they announced the phone records. So they announce all this stuff and then boom, you have all this new information coming out in the public sphere. Fauci concealed more information. Fauci was apparently aware of miscarriage links to the vaccine. So he was cognitively aware that there were potential complications with miscarriage, with fertility, and yet he ignored that and kept pushing the vaccine and mandates involved in that. So I guess from a clinical perspective, a physician that is very aware of a potential adverse event that could occur to pregnant women went out in public and lied about it. If you're aware at any level that there might be a problem, you have to press pause. But again, it's becoming very obvious now that Tony Fauci knew of adverse events and did not release those concerns. And I guess if you look at it, there's a couple different ways to distill that down. And I saw this statistic in the media bandied about on Monday that there was like an 80% miscarriage rate based on the COVID-19 vaccine. I would pump the brakes on all those percentages on miscarriages and all that other stuff. I don't think getting into the weeds about the percentages, it's 12% to 81%, whatever that is. I think suffice it to say, at some level, Anthony Fauci knew that there could be issues, but pressed ahead anyway. And I would urge you to think about it. Like today, it's, miscarriage rates. That's not the main one. The main one that you want to be paying attention to is when they start talking about myocarditis. And I can promise you, if they're talking about miscarriages now, myocarditis is not far off from being discussed here. And I guess when you look at this whole thing with if you've got 34,000 text messages, all these voicemails, et cetera, they're going to do slow leak after slow leak after slow leak on this. And there's going to be a lot more coming out about what Anthony Fauci knew, when he knew it. And I think if you look at what's going to happen to Tony Fauci in the public sphere, it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. And again, historically, this guy is toast. He is never going to sleep again. I think even if he doesn't see the inside of a jail cell, Anthony Fauci is going to live in a tortured state the rest of his days. And I think it's interesting because as this information keeps being released, people's eyes are going to start being opened. You're already seeing people sharing stories. When you start seeing lady after lady talk about a miscarriage that occurred after a COVID-19, you're going to start getting very personal stories coming out very soon. And the more stories that come out, the more anecdotes that come out, the more the public is going to see this exposed. And quite frankly, look, as horrific as this whole thing is, somebody that wants justice, it's also glorious. Because as this information comes out, as this pressure increases, so are the calls for prosecution. That's what's going to happen. It's going to get pulled along with it. Because the more people become aware of this, the angrier they're going to get, and the more they're going to demand some type of accountability from Anthony Fauci. And so I guess maybe it ends up at the state level where he's bagged there. And again, I mentioned it a minute ago, even if he doesn't get bagged by a state, his legacy is cooked historically. He's toast historically. And what's happening is you're seeing this now, this narrative This fairy tale that Anthony Fauci is the savior is being replaced with the narrative that Anthony Fauci is actually the villain. And what's going to get super interesting the more this goes along is if there was concealed clinical data. That's what you really want to keep your eye on. And I can promise you they concealed data, because if Pfizer held the data for 75 years, they're hiding something. And that's where it's going to get super interesting, because if Fauci and these guys hid clinical data, now you've got a really serious legal issue going on here. Because if the Fauci and his cabal of losers hid data from the public, and it appears that they did, if they hid clinical data, then they were not providing informed consent. Informed consent means that a patient is very aware of all risks and benefits. That's part of transparency. If a patient is not given the full risk profile of the medication they're being asked to ingest, now you've got a legal crime. Not providing informed consent is what the Nazis did in concentration camps. Nuremberg and the Nuremberg trials, one of the things that came out of it is that doctors are required in any medical situation to provide informed consent to the patient. So again, if Anthony Fauci did not provide informed consent to the patient, now you're talking about a legal crime. What that would mean, legal crime, is interesting because the pharmaceutical companies have a legal cover here. If informed consent was not given, then the pharmaceutical companies lose their liability shield. And if the pharmaceutical companies lose their liability shield, then you're looking at class action lawsuits. And again, Anthony Fauci is looking at civil lawsuits. If you lost your baby because of some bad advice that Anthony Fauci gave, you're probably looking for some legal remedy. So Anthony Fauci could be looking at class action lawsuits. He could be looking at state prosecution. He could be looking at civil lawsuits. And I guess I'm just going to end this segment this way. Baby Jesus, if you can hear the Foggy Dew, please give me Anthony Fauci. Make my day brighter, baby Jesus. But you watch this whole saga with Tony Fauci play out. This is going to get insane, and I'm here for all of it. So trust me, I'll be watching it. So switching gears, I got a lot of text messages over the weekend with people wanting me to talk about the WNBA, and I know that there are probably people that are tuning in that want to know my thoughts on that whole situation that unfolded over the weekend. And to be fair, guys, I actually didn't do a show on Monday because I wanted to get a day away from the whole WNBA thing. If you ask me, I think people like a Clay Travis, a Riley Gaines, Sage Steele, people that are more social commentators and like sports oriented are probably better on that topic than I would be. But I guess just based on listener feedback, I'll go ahead and address it real quick and give my 2 cents. And I guess the bottom line here is that two biological males want to join the WNBA. If you're asking me, I think that's great. I think it's great for equality. I love it. Because the logic that these woke clowns in the WNBA employ is totally flawed. The WNBA is racist, it's woke, and it's funny because you're watching it just defy common sense. Biological men should not compete against biological women, period, end of discussion. I don't know why this is difficult. But the problem with it is that the woke parade, the woke clown show, sees this issue of trans in sports as a civil rights issue. They see it as a morality issue, which it is not a civil rights issue. It is not a morality issue. What they are doing is they are fighting a battle. They're fighting a battle that was lost to common sense quite a while ago. And what's occurring with these two biological men, these men are putting the WNBA in a position where the league cannot win. Their pretzel logic is being exposed in real time. And what they did is absolutely brilliant. They're putting the WNBA in a position where they have to accept men and to prove their moral haughtiness. Or what the WNBA can do is ban them and they can join the dark side of the force. They really have no options here that make any logical sense. And I have to imagine looking at this situation, kind of playing the string of logic out, I would have to imagine that they would ban people that were born biological men. I think that is the logical outcome of what occurs here. The WNBA cannot allow a 6'8" and a 6'10" professional male athlete into the league. It would destroy the league. If they let these two guys in, absolutely everybody would be clowning on the NBA every night. They would destroy the brand. It would be a total, complete circus. And not only would it be a complete circus if they let these two guys in, the women make, I think it's $500,000 a year. Well, these G League guys, lower level NCAA guys, they would flock to that. There's gold in them their hills. If I'm a G League guy making $40,000 a year, why wouldn't I be like, hey, you know what? I think I'm a woman. I'm going to go play in the WNBA and make more loot. So I don't think that the WNBA is going to be in a position where they're going to be allowed to let these men in. The league can't do that. So what's going to happen is with all these meetings and all this stuff, all the talking heads in the WNBA, they're going to be forced to make it a rule that biological men cannot join the league. And if that's what the WNBA lands at, if that's what the administration lands at, if they land at a position where biological men cannot join the league, then what's going to happen is Royce White and as Cantor Freedom are going to sue the league. They're going to sue the league for discrimination. Because the WNBA would be violating their own rules. And then what would happen is the WNBA, the NBA would settle out of court with these guys. So these guys just cashed a paycheck. They just cashed a lottery ticket. So again, if you ask me, my commentary on the WNBA, I think this whole thing is crazy. The league is going to ban biological men. And the minute that they ban biological men, I guess what's going to happen then is that all of the woke DEI people that exist in the WNBA are all going to become MAGA, I guess. But these folks, the woke clowns in the WNBA, are going to be forced to eat their own words, and I love all of it. And I guess just a couple of observations beyond the perfect logic trap that these two guys created for the league. I guess number one to me, like when you look at this situation, is what you would want to ask yourself is how many men are in the WNBA right now? Has anybody ever thought about that or talked about it? I mean, look at Brittany Griner. And again, I don't know what the deal is with Brittany Griner, but Brittany Griner, I've seen videos of her. It sure looks and sounds like a man. And again, I'm not trying to be ridiculous. I'm just saying what my own eyes are observing. And I guess my question is, if Brittany Griner is that way, maybe, then are there others in the league? And I have no idea. But it sure seems plausible if you look at the whole scope of this, because it would explain to me some of the pro-trans positions that the league has. And I guess if you go beyond that, secondly, I saw that the league is having a meeting, which I alluded to earlier. They're literally sitting here. So you have a professional sports league that is sitting down. They had to call a summit or some kind of meeting to discuss what a woman is. They're going to get a fruit basket, a nice hotel room, a bottle of wine. The response of any of these people is to have a meeting. Why do you need to have a meeting to discuss what a woman is? And everybody involved in this situation should be fired or terminated. You shouldn't have a job if you have to have a meeting to discuss what a woman is. And that's really what blows your mind. This is a professional sport league. How is the league this dumb? Absolutely zero people that are in charge of the WNBA shouldn't be in charge of anything. It's so funny watching this be exposed in real time. You see this with all these liberal administrations. It's like the commissioner of the WNBA is the Cracker Barrel CEO not understanding reality. Yeah, we're just going to go ahead and destroy our brand and swap it out. We don't know what our customers want. It's like the Bud Light thing in a way. It's just oblivious to reality. So this lady that's the commissioner of the WNBA can't make a decision on her own, so she decides to call a meeting to get consensus. The PR look for the entire league for all these people is insane. And I guess if you look at it and say, okay, this is a commissioner of a sports league, she should be smarter than this. If you step back and look at the WNBA, the WNBA loses $50 million a year. And I guess the question is, what business on earth that's a for-profit business loses $50 million a year. The WNBA is subsidized by the men's league, by the NBA. The WNBA has been subsidized for decades. So this commissioner can't really understand that she's running a failing business anyway. And the interesting thing about them running a failing business is that this business that's losing $50 million a year was handed a lottery ticket, and the lottery ticket was named Caitlin Clark. The league was handed a lottery ticket named Caitlin Clark. It was handed a lottery ticket named Sophie Cunningham. And instead of cashing in that lottery ticket, they decided to squander it to their false idol, DEI and woke. And it's interesting watching this whole dynamic. The league is not better. How has the league gotten better in the last couple of years when the lottery ticket showed up? It's turned into a circus. It's turned into a circus, which is almost like a car wreck. It's hard to look away from it. It's so interesting if you step back and look at this ideology of the people that are in the WNBA. I mentioned earlier in this kind of diatribe that these people in the WNBA and the woke clowns that are surrounding this, these folks view trans rights as a civil rights issue. That's the thing to remember about all this. It's like they won another civil rights battle like that occurred in the 60s. They're fighting a battle that's over. Fighting for trans rights in their mind is like they're marching on Selma. And I guess the thing that's so interesting to me about this dynamic with these people thinking in their brains that they're marching on Selma, defending trans rights, like at what point did the pursuit of civil rights disengage from common sense? The logic that trans rights are somehow civil rights starts to break down when you have biological men in women's restrooms. It's like the scales of common sense were tipped decades ago, and the Civil Rights Brigade didn't notice that the scales had tipped. It's like cheering when you're flying off a cliff. And I guess if you look at it, if you're somebody that views issues like this as a civil rights issue, if you view it as a civil rights issue, then that allows you license to claim moral indignance at this. You're able to claim a moral high ground like that you alone are defending civil rights. You are the culture warrior fighting this moral battle for civil rights so everyone can be equal. And the problem with it is the morality component to that viewpoint. They view their position as moral, and that is the real problem here. It is a similar train of logic, like a moral logic, to like abortion rights. And I guess maybe that's a good place to take this. That is the similar train of logic, like defending trans rights, thinking it's a civil rights issue, and viewing like an abortion right. The left, the woke people on the left, have sold young women that the right to abortion is a civil right. You can see it in any kind of protest. They're like, hey, like the government is taking away my right to do this. Okay, the government is taking your rights away is a pretty dense way to look at that, in that the civil right you're wanting to claim also terminates a life. So I guess I understand the logic here, but unfortunately it breaks down on the pro-con ledger. Like, yes, you are fighting for what you perceive to be a right, but the problem with that is the end result of the right that you're advocating for results in terminating a baby. And I guess if you ask me, is that civil right a right you want to fight for? That's a pretty dark logic path. And I can't even really think of a good analogy. It's like celebrating when you pull the short straw. You're like, yes, I finally painted myself into a corner. But I guess if you look at these two issues like trans rights, abortion, the logic process is the same. It's a moral capture of the civil rights issue. And it's interesting talking about the abortion thing because I think I saw this demonic video the other day that kind of made me link these issues. So just for some background on this, in Massachusetts, the governor of Massachusetts is a Democrat named Maura Haley. Well, Maura Haley just signed a bill in the state of Massachusetts, and what it does is it legalizes abortion up to pregnancy. So in layman's terms, what that means is that this Healy person just signed a full-term abortion law. Full-term abortion is now legal in Massachusetts. There are 10 states now that do this. So 20% of the states in the union are doing this. Full-term abortion laws. Alaska, I was looking at this list. It's so interesting. Alaska, Colorado, Alaska blows my mind. Maryland, Michigan, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, Minnesota, New Jersey, and DC. 20% of the states in the union allow this. That is so dark to me. In the video, if you watch the video, it's absolutely insane. It's this Healy lady is sitting at a desk signing this bill, and you have like 20 white women standing around like applauding and cheering. They're standing around cheering, smiling, applauding while Governor Healy signs this bill. And look, for a guy in the Midwest, like it blew my mind because that is such a radical position. That is a radical law. Nowhere else on earth is that allowed. Nowhere. And you know that anybody that's standing at that desk cheering for that is a single issue voter. You have to be a single issue voter if you're standing around cheering and applauding that the state now is allowing people to kill a baby at 30 plus weeks. Just from a logic perspective, like that just seems insane to me. But again, it's the logic train taking them to that far station. That logic that they employed led them to think that unless they have that right to terminate a baby at 35 weeks, then they're being oppressed. Logic led them there. Their own shifting morality led them there. And I guess morality is the thing I take away from it. But and I thought this was so interesting. Healy, Governor Healy, the person that signed that bill, is a Catholic. She claims to be a staunch Catholic. So brass tacks, what you have is you have a Catholic, a person claiming to be Catholic anyway, signing a baby murder bill. And that to me is the ultimate logic fail. Like Healy should be the one that's really kind of knocked out here. I am a cradle Catholic, just to be completely clear. And I am pretty sure after almost 50 years in the Catholic Church that the Catholic Church 1000% opposes abortion. But I guess if it's just the two of us listening here talking, you have to come to the conclusion that Healy doesn't really believe in Catholicism then. She can't. Because if you're a Catholic that really believed in an afterlife and you believed in God's judgment, you really wouldn't be signing that bill. You would veto it, and if you were forced to by the legislature, sign it. But you shouldn't proactively sign it. And I guess I'm looking at this person claiming to be a Catholic, and then she's signing a baby murder bill. And I guess the conclusion that I draw off that paradigm is that she's some kind of reptile skinwalker. And what I mean by that is she's a snake. What she does is a person like this uses faith. She uses faith and religion as a cloak. It's a disguise. It's a costume that she puts on. You cannot sit there on Sundays kneeling before God, praying for the unborn, and then on Monday sign a bill codifying abortion up to 35, 36 weeks. Because it's totally disingenuous. The spectrum of logic couldn't be any farther apart. And it's so interesting when I look at like that Healy, it's almost like a Pelosi or a Biden. Pelosi and Biden claim to be staunch Catholics. And the whole thing is a facade, right? Pelosi and Biden were the leaders of a party that are trying to codify abortion. Codifying abortion as a Catholic is a huge logic fail. It's a moral fail. But what it does is it fits neatly into the morality of civil rights. And what that is, it's a shifting morality. It's a pliable morality. But the logic, either which way you look at it, from the WNBA with the trans rights thing to abortion rights, it's the same thing. You're whistling logic, you're whistling morality right off a cliff. But anyway, I just thought it was so interesting looking at this WA thing and looking at it as a broader social contagion, which is exactly what it is. But trust me, I'll be watching it. So something quick that I wanted to dive into, just kind of a side note. I've been watching this quick polling data. There's polling data that keeps coming out, like these like drops on like the 2028 presidential field on the blue side. There are all these like snap polls that are coming out now. And it's interesting looking at an aggregate because I'm totally fascinated by who the Democrats are going to run in 2028. And I guess for months now, if you listen to the Foggy Dew, especially like the poll position has really not changed. For months, it has been Kamala, then Gavin Newsom, then you would have like AOC, Buttigieg. It's just the normal cast of characters, right? Kamala was always number one. And if you look at any polling over the last few months, Newsom was always number two. And these numbers weren't by a little, it was by a lot. Kamala was way far ahead. Newsom was way far in second position. And I've said repeatedly on the Foggy Dew that Gavin Newsom is finished politically. There is no way this guy's even going to be in the primary come 2028. And you're starting to see that bear out. It is now official. Gavin Newsom has lost his second spot. Gavin Newsom's star has fallen to the point where he is no longer number two. So what do the polls look like now? So Kamala Harris for 2028 president, Kamala Harris is still in the lead. But what you have now is you have two new people in a tie for second place in the Democrat field. So what you have now is you have Kamala number one. You have AOC now tied for second at 11%. Well, also at 11%, you have Jon Ossoff, who's the Georgia senator. Gavin Newsom now is in, well, I guess it would be fourth position. Gavin Newsom dropped to 10% probability. And I've said it before on the show, like I think the AOC thing is obvious. AOC is the Democrat Socialists of America queen. Her star is going to rise here. Her star is going to rise especially if Democrat Socialist candidates overperform in these elections. So I don't think AOC is any surprise seeing her climb up the polls. It's interesting when you look at like an Ossoff. He is kind of a dark horse here. Ossoff is a well-spoken white guy. And I guess maybe that desire of the DNC to get a white man somehow in the field is served by a guy like Jon Ossoff. But the problem with Jon Ossoff is if you actually listen to this guy, he fits the visual profile. He fits the visual profile of a white guy, well-spoken. The problem with it is that his positions are just absolutely weak. He will never win in a general election. He's a weak candidate. And I believe he's a junior senator, Raphael Warnock in Georgia, but I don't take him seriously as a viable contender. Again, his positions are weak. He would get crushed in a general. But I guess my only point in talking about this is watch out for AOC. She is for real, guys. And personally, I really don't know how 2028 is going to play out. The DNC, if you look at any of the financials coming out of the DNC, the Democrat National Convention is absolutely, totally broke. They have no money at all. The establishment DNC has no money. They had to take out more loans just over the last 2 weeks. All of their funding is evaporated. It's vanished. So what you're seeing is this dynamic. The establishment DNC, the establishment Democrat Party, is getting absolutely destroyed here. And the reason why is because the Democrat Party, is in a complete civil war that's happening in real time, and it's happening in the open. The more normal Democrat voters see of what the Democrat Socialists are doing, the less they like it. Again, I talked about it, I think it was last week, like Joe Lunchpail in Michigan is coming to the unfortunate realization that there is a communist Muslim now running for Senate in the state of Michigan. That is a sobering thing to see when you're eating your cornflakes. But this idea that people are just going to latch on and vote blue no matter who is being destroyed in real time. And I have case in point. Beltway insiders, people that actually know the inside of DC, know a guy named Julian Epstein. Now, you might not know the name Julian Epstein, but Julian Epstein is the insider of insiders in the Democrat Party. Again, a genuine party insider. This guy, Julian Epstein, he was the chief counsel for the House Judiciary Democrats. This guy is a legit guy. Well, unfortunately for the Democrat Party, Julian Epstein, a Democrat insider, just endorsed the Republican Mike Rogers in Michigan. And that might not be a big deal to you if you don't even know the name Epstein in this situation, but that is a seismic thing. Because what is happening on the ground is that normal people are now seeing the communist bend of the Democrat socialists, and they're bailing on the party. And again, Epstein is not a big name, but it's a significant name. Normal, everyday Democrats are walking away from the party. And the party has a problem, and really what they have is an insurgency. It's an insurgency because the establishment wing is welcoming this whole thing in. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeff, they're all sitting here welcoming the Democrat socialists in. What they're doing is they go on these Sunday shows, they go on the MSNBCs of the world, and they call it a, quote, big tent Democrat party. And these establishment people can sit there and lie to themselves and think that they're a big tent party. That's not accurate anymore. You can't sit there and squeal about that you're a big tent party welcoming in ideas. It's not a big tent party, and the reason why is that the establishment has absolutely no control of the party now. It's not a big tent party when the insurgents are eating the party from the ground up. The old guard, the establishment people that I just mentioned, they fell asleep at the wheel. And what's happening is that the new guard, the insurgents, the Democrat socialists, they took over. And the result of that on the ground is that lawyers and people like Epstein are walking away from the party. Blue collar folks are walking away from the party. So again, the establishment can sit there and talk about big tent on CNN, but the reality is that the insurgents are now in the driver's seat. Not only are they in the driver's seat, the establishment is bleeding out in real time. You're seeing AOC ascend. You're seeing the Democrat Socialist star ascend. And the more this occurs, the more that the party's going to get eaten alive. And it's just beautiful to watch. But anyway, I saw this polling. Gavin Newsom has lost his star. And it'll continue to fade, and good, because Gavin Newsom shouldn't be anywhere near the White House. But trust me, I'll be watching it. So switching gears, I had one last segment that I saw this thing and I kind of had to laugh. American history is so interesting. I had a very loyal listener of the show ask me at one point if I would ever run out of stories for the show. Like, are you ever going to run out of historical stories to talk about? And I started laughing. I'm like, no way, man. There's so many stories. American history is like this ocean of stories. You have stories of heroism. You have stories of patriotism, defiance, courage, sacrifice, right? All the things that we try to strive for, not just as Americans, but as people, right? It's amazing. American history is so dense. It's so full and it's so beautiful. And every now and then you come across a story that is just like almost too perfect. But it's almost like this guy with the postcard story. Like, that's a perfect story for the Foggy Dew. So again, maybe it's not a perfect story, but some of the wrinkles of a story will really blow your mind. And I guess to get into this, I found a story like a week or so ago, and it made me personally just laugh out loud. This was absolutely perfect for the show, so I wanted to go ahead and throw it in this week. And this story is going to start with a guy named Roger Young. And you probably don't know who Roger Young is, but you're going to hear about it right now. Roger Young was born in Ohio in 1918. And this guy was extremely short. He was only 5'2". So Roger Young, this small stature guy, born in a small town in Ohio, pretty good athlete. Again, very diminutive. This guy was also an expert marksman and hunter. He took that very seriously in rural Ohio. But again, being from Ohio, football was this guy's passion. But again, being 5'2", you're a little bit small to be playing football. So he was really too small for his high school football team. But out of sheer grit and determination, he ended up making his high school football team. Well, the problem with him making the football team and with his size combined, the challenge that Young had is that in this game he played in, he had a pretty serious head injury. So he gets a head injury playing football, and that head injury caused him vision and hearing issues. So those vision and hearing issues were so bad that Young ended up dropping out of high school. And here he is. He's like literally like 17, 18 years old. His hearing and vision are just completely shot. So by this point, by the time he's dropping out of high school, at this point, it's like the late 30s. So this guy has no job, no school, and he's got all these medical issues. So obviously, if you have all these medical issues, you're going to have a hard time getting a job. Well, and you can imagine late 30s, America's kind of barreling into World War II. Young really wanted to join the Army, but he figured that the Army wouldn't accept him because of his medical issues. So what he did is, instead of applying directly to the Army, what he did is he applied to the Ohio National Guard in 1939. So here's Young. He joins the Ohio National Guard, who accepted him. He was the shortest man in the Ohio National Guard, and he wore glasses to correct his vision issues. Well, what happened was, I said, man, World War II is coming up. So as World War II is unrolling, the Ohio National Guard was actually federalized. So his National Guard company was federalized. So they're calling these guys up. And what happened is Young is promoted to sergeant and he's deployed to the Pacific with the 148th Infantry. So this guy Young is promoted to sergeant, deployed to the Pacific. He's actually sent to Fiji. So he's sent to Fiji and he was involved in Operation Cartwheel. And that's something you probably never heard of. But basically what Operation Cartwheel was, that was the Allied plan to capture the Solomon Islands back from the Japanese. And specifically in Operation Cartwheel, that war was waged in New Georgia. So here's this young kid out of Ohio, short guy, vision, hearing issues. So he now finds himself in the early days of America's involvement in World War II. He's island hopping in the Pacific. Well, as the 148th is getting ready to invade New Georgia, Young actually requested a demotion. His hearing and his vision had deteriorated to the point where he couldn't lead his men. As a sergeant, he needed those faculties to lead his men in combat. Well, Young had realized, as he was going through this he realized he couldn't perform that leadership role. So what happened is that the military authorities that Young they approved his request. So Young was granted a request. He was made a private. So being a private, he could help assault the beach at New Georgia. So he lands on New Georgia as a private, assaults the beach. This man fights the Japanese for 9 days on New Georgia. So imagine the situation here. The Americans land on New Georgia, they're fighting for 9 days, and they're pushing the Japanese inland. They're pushing them into the island interior. Well, so what happens after 9 days of fighting on July 31st, 1943, here's Young, he's out with a 20-man patrol. So that 20-man patrol, what they were doing is they were scouting Japanese defenses in the interior. So they do their surveillance, they finish their mission, and they start heading back to the American lines. Well, as the patrol is heading back, they're ambushed. So 5 Japanese soldiers in a gun pit open fire on these 20 guys with a heavy machine gun. And the weird thing about the gun pit is the Japanese have the high ground here, so they're shooting down on the Americans. Well, 2 guys in this 20-man patrol were killed outright. Young was wounded. Well, so the guy commanding the 20 soldiers, the Americans tried to do a flanking maneuver, but 2 more guys were killed. So here you have the Americans, they're pinned down and they've already lost 4 guys and Young is injured. So the patrol leader goes, you know what, we got to get out of here. He signals a retreat. Well, Young decided to ignore the retreat order. What he did instead, so he ignores the retreat order, and what he does, he starts crawling forward, drawing Japanese fire, and he's hit again. So here he's hit a second time. He's shot a second time by these Japanese soldiers. What he did is he kept advancing. So he keeps advancing, crawling at this Japanese gun pit. Well, now what's happening is the Japanese are now totally focused on Young. They're watching this guy. They shot him multiple times and he keeps coming at them. So as Young is crawling forward at this gun pit, he finally decides to get up and start attacking. What he does is he stands up, he starts shooting at these guys and throwing grenades. So net, Young is now in a gunfight with a Japanese machine gun crew in a solo action. Well, what happened was Young ended up killing the entire gun crew. So he kills all 5 Japanese soldiers. The problem with it is that Young was hit a 3rd time and he was killed in that action. But his action, his solo action, because the Japanese were so focused on what he was doing, his action allowed the other soldiers to escape and reform their line. Well, so obviously, if you do something like that, you're going to win a Medal of Honor, and Young deservedly won a Medal of Honor for his bravery. It's interesting, even today at Fort Benning, Georgia, the night infiltration course is actually named for Young. And that course, that night infiltration course, basically what it is, it's like where recruits crawl through like a pit. They're crawling under barbed wire while machine guns are going off overhead. So it's exactly what Young did, right? But that pit at Fort Benning is named for Young. So you have Young, after he does this heroic action, they name this thing after him in Fort Benning. Well, it's interesting because Young wasn't forgotten there. Young also became the muse for a World War II song. So there was this guy named Frank Lasser. Frank Lasser wrote a song about Young. He read about this in the newspaper and decided to write a song about this guy. So Lasser wrote Broadway plays. He wrote lyrics for musicals, stuff like that. But he saw this and was so inspired by it. Lasser wrote a dirge called The Ballad of Roger Young. So he writes this song. He wrote it and recorded it in March of 1945. It's a war song. It's a war ballad. Well, every single lyric that was from this ballad was taken. It was lifted from Young's Medal of Honor citation. So Lasser writes this song, and it was first broadcast in 1945. Well, the first broadcast of this song, The Ballad of Roger Young, was on this obscure radio show that was done by a lady named Meredith Willson. So I guess from the start, like it got 0 airplay. So from the start, this is like a completely forgettable song that this Lasser guy wrote. There was no big studio behind it. It was like a Broadway guy wrote this song. The song itself was not considered commercially viable with how they did music back in that day. That entire dynamic of this song not being noteworthy changed when Burl Ives, the singer Burl Ives, ended up recording this song. And if you don't know Burl Ives was like a totally prolific singer. He had like 6 decades of songs. Burl Ives was a very, very well-known singer back at that time. So Burl Ives ended up putting out a single. And that's what they did. They had records. It was like an A side and a B side. So Burl Ives puts out a hit for him. The A side, you ready for this? The A side single was the Foggy Dew. So Burl Ives records the Foggy Dew. The Foggy Dew is the A side of the record. The B side of the record for Burl Ives was The Ballad of Roger Young. So Foggy Dew is this big hit for Burl Ives, and The Ballad of Roger Young comes along for the ride because it's being sold on the same A and B side record. So everybody's watching Burl Ives. It's a big hit. So that ballad, the B-side hit, The Ballad of Roger Young, was then covered by other musicians. So it's now being covered by other musicians. Burl Ives is singing it. Because of this entire situation, The Ballad of Roger Young then became like this World War II staple and a hit song. The U.S. military loved the song, and it became the most requested song by service members for a decade after World War II. Here's some of the lyrics. Again, he wrote it from the Medal of Honor citation. These are the actual lyrics of the song. Quote, "Caught in an ambush lay a company of riflemen, just grenades against machine guns in the gloom. Caught in an ambush till this one of 20 riflemen volunteered to meet his doom. It was he who drew the fire of the enemy, that a company of men might live to fight. And before the deadly fire of the enemy stood the man we hail tonight. Stood the man Roger Young, fought and died for the men he marched among. Like the everlasting courage of the infantry was the last deed of Private Roger Young," end quote. It's so interesting looking at this. And again, how perfect is this for the Foggy Dew in the show? Young wasn't done. I started really looking into Roger Young and like what else came of this, right? Most people have seen or heard the movie Starship Troopers. Like, you're familiar with that. Starship Troopers was actually, the movie was written off a book. So there was a book called Starship Troopers that was written by a guy named Robert Heinlein. And if you don't know that name, Robert Heinlein was like the grand wizard of sci-fi writing. So in the actual book, Starship Troopers, Heinlein named the troop transport the Roger Young. And Heinlein wasn't done there. Heinlein actually also used Roger Young in a short story called The Long Watch. And what he did is the mountain range in the story was called the Roger Young Mountains. I just thought it was so interesting. I'm sitting here looking at stuff with Roger Young, and I started looking into Burl Ives when he did. Like, I saw this whole thing with Burl Ives, and I guess I just never put this whole thing together. Like, I knew about the Ballad of Roger Young. Like, I knew about that song, but I didn't know the Foggy Dew connection with Burl Ives. Anyway, I just thought it was a perfect show for the story for the show. It's just, I think it's so interesting, all the wrinkles that you look at. But I guess the bottom line of this is that it's really about a guy named Roger Young, who's a real American hero. And I guess it's so interesting. Like, if you think about it, like, songs are sung for bravery. Roger Young was so brave that songs were sung about him. So again, thank you to Roger Young. Okay, I'll go ahead and wrap the show for today. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.